The Austrian Ultimatum. When on the morning of Sunday the 5th of July, Count Hoyos reached Berlin, he consulted with the Austro-Hungarian ambassador, Count Szorzenyi, who asked forthwith for an audience of the Kaiser in order to deliver the letter of the Emperor Francis Joseph. The Kaiser invited the ambassador to luncheon at Potsdam. Count Hoyos proceeded to the Foreign Office and had a lengthy conversation with Zimmermann. Meanwhile, Szorzenyi reached Potsdam and delivered his letter and memorandum. The Kaiser read them both and said at first that he had expected some serious step against Serbia, but that possible European complications made it necessary for him to consult the Imperial Chancellor before giving a definite answer. After luncheon, however, Wilhelm II, without waiting for Bethmann Hollweg's arrival, made the following momentous statement, which he authorised the ambassador to convey to Francis Joseph as a personal message from sovereign to sovereign. The German Promise. The Kaiser, according to the ambassador, said that Austria might rely on Germany's full support. He must first hear the opinion of the Chancellor, but he did not in the least doubt that Herr von Bethmann Hollweg would agree with him, especially in the matter of the action against Serbia. It was the Kaiser's opinion that this action must not be delayed. Russia's attitude would doubtless be hostile, but he had been prepared for this for years, and should it come to war between Austria-Hungary and Russia, Austria could be assured that Germany would stand by her side with her accustomed loyalty. As things stood today, however, Russia was in no way prepared for war, and would certainly think twice before appealing to arms, although she would incite the powers of the Triple Entente against Austria, and add fuel to the fire in the Balkans. He understood very well that it would be hard for his Imperial and Royal Majesty, with his well-known love of peace, to march into Serbia. But if we really had recognised the necessity of war against Serbia, he would regret it if he did not make use of the present moment, which is all in our favour. It did not take Count Szorzenyi very long to return to Berlin and telegraph these declarations to Vienna. The Kaiser's decision. The Kaiser was under no illusions upon the gravity of the step he had taken. He had in fact decided to court the general European war. He had urged Austria to invade Serbia and had promised to defend her against Russian interference. As the German defence of Austria against Russia meant the immediate German invasion of France and violation of Belgian neutrality, the whole fearful panorama was unrolled. Of course, he hoped it would not come to war. Austria would punish Serbia and be once more indebted to Germany. France and England, in fear of war or love of peace, or from moral or material unpreparedness, would persuade Russia to stand aside, and Russia, convinced at last of the worthlessness of their friendship or alliance, would abandon the Triple Entente. The Central Powers would tower up, united and triumphant, over a bloodless field. For the future, they would have only isolated opponents to confront. The mailed fist and the shining armour would once again have done their work, and he, the Kaiser, would have proved his mettle to the satisfaction even of his most exacting subjects. But if not, so much the worse for them all. The Kaiser's servants. He was to leave at 9:15 the next morning upon his yachting cruise in the Norwegian fjords. Before that, there was much to do. He had already summoned the Chancellor and the heads of the fighting services. General von Falkenhayn, the Prussian Minister of War, arrived at 5 p.m, Bethmann Hollweg at 6, and Captain Zenker, representing the naval staff, a little after 7. Admiral von Kappel, representing the Admiralty, in the absence of Tirpitz, and General von Bertrab, the senior general staff officer then present in Berlin, arrived between 8 and 9 the next morning. Baron Krupp, head of the armaments works, was commanded to dine with the Emperor at Kiel the following night. To each of these functionaries, the Emperor spoke separately, and all of them have recorded their impression of what he said. On July the 5th, Falkenhayn wrote to Moltke, the chief of the staff, who was taking a cure, that His Majesty had informed him that Austria-Hungary appears determined not to tolerate any longer the plots hatched against Austria in the Balkan Peninsula, and if necessary, to accomplish this end, to begin by marching into Serbia, even if Russia will not tolerate this. Austria is not disposed to give way, Considerable time will elapse before the treaty with Bulgaria is concluded. So your excellency hardly need curtail your stay at Carlsbad. Nevertheless, I thought it desirable, although I have fought no instructions to do so, to let you know that the situation is acute, in order that you may not be quite unprepared for surprises, which in the end may come about. To the Kaiser's direct question whether the army was ready for all contingencies, Falkenhayn had replied briefly and unconditionally that it was ready. Bethmann Holweg merely expressed his concurrence with the Emperor's views, as recorded by him in more guarded language. Captain Zenker reported to the naval superiors. His Majesty informed me that the Austro-Hungarian charge d'affaires had inquired of him whether Germany would fulfill the obligations of her alliance in the event of an Austro-Hungarian conflict with Serbia, and the strained relations with Russia that might perhaps result. His Majesty had promised this, but he did not believe that Russia would intervene on behalf of Serbia, which had stained itself by an assassination. France too would scarcely let it come to war, as she lacked the heavy artillery for the field armies. Yet though war against France and Russia was not probable, nevertheless the possibility of such a war must be borne in mind from a military point of view. Still, the High Seas Fleet was to start its cruise to Norway, as had been planned for the middle of July, and he was going to start on his journey according to schedule. Admiral von Keppel recorded that the Kaiser did not believe that a great war would develop. In his opinion, the Tsar would not associate himself with the murderers of princes. Besides that, neither France nor Russia was prepared for war. The Emperor did not mention England. On the advice of the Imperial Chancellor, he was going to start quietly on the journey to the north, in order not to rouse any apprehensions. Nevertheless, he wished to inform me of the strained situation, in order that I might consider it further. General von Bertram's evidence is almost identical. Baron Krupp informed a colleague on his board of directors on the 17th of July that the Emperor had spoken to him on the conversation with the Austrians, but had characterised the affairs as so secret that he, Krupp, would not have ventured to communicate it even to his board of directors. The Emperor had told him personally that he would declare war immediately if Russia mobilised. The Emperor's repeated insistence that in this matter no one would be able to reproach him again with want of resolution had produced an almost comic effect. The Potsdam interviews, 5th of July. These interviews have been made the basis for the report that the Kaiser held on the 5th of July a Crown Council at Potsdam on the question of peace or war. Wilhelm II had been at pains to repel this suggestion. Actually, the action he took was at once far more autocratic and more slipshod than any council or conference. He only saw his Chancellor and officers separately and handled the whole business in a purely personal manner. On the morning of July the 7th, the imperial yacht Hohenzollern sailed away to Norway, and for 3 weeks the mighty potentate, upon whose word the lives of countless millions hung, took no part in European affairs. Mischief thou art afoot, take thou what course thou wilt. German naval measures. The measures taken by the various German authorities after the Kaiser's departure were discreet. Moltke's deputy at the General Staff, Waldersee, disposed at the post-war parliamentary investigation. There was nothing to initiate. The army, as always, was ready. And at the time he wrote to Jago, a strange official intimacy between the Foreign Secretary and a subordinate military officer. I shall remain here ready to jump. We are all prepared at the General Staff. In the meantime, there is nothing to do. Krupp, after a preliminary inquiry, learned that the munition works had sufficient materials on hand to guarantee the activity of all factories for quite a long time, even if fully shut off. The Navy required more attention and seems to have had a sharper realisation. After secret conference of the highest officials summoned by Admiral von Keppel, it was decided to hasten the construction of all nearly completed small craft, to increase the fuel supplies, to provide fleet auxiliaries and storeships, to put into shape the naval flying forces, and to send a battleship on a test trip through the now just deepened Kiel Canal. Warnings were also sent to the cruisers in foreign stations. Admiral von Spee commanding in the Pacific, was told on the 6th of July to remain with the Scharnhorst and Gneisenau at Ponape in certain and constant communication. On the 9th, he was told that war between Austria and Serbia was possible, and that the Triple Alliance might become involved, and on the 10th, that England might be involved if it came to a general war. The Goeben was ordered to Pola, and workmen sent from Germany to hasten repair of her boiler tubes, and Admiral Souchon was informed that the situation was not free from anxiety. Lastly, the little gunboat Eber, which was being repaired in our dockyard at Cape Town, was warned to adjust the work to the political situation. She curtailed her repairs forthwith. Of this last item, a report reached the British Admiralty. It was not quite clear why the Eber had changed her programme of work. The indication was, however, too slight for conclusions to be drawn. After all, we too were always ready. When Lord Granville became Foreign Secretary on the 6th of July 1870, he was informed by his official adviser that he had never known during his long experience so great a lull in foreign affairs, so that he was not aware of any important question that the new minister would have to deal with. A few days later, the Franco-German War had begun. Now in 1914, on this very 6th of July, Sir Arthur Nicholson himself wrote that, "Apart from Albania, we have no very urgent and pressing question to preoccupy us in the rest of Europe." Thus, history repeats itself. The Austrian Cabinet Council, 7th of July. Early on the morning of the 7th, Count Hoyos returned from Berlin with the fateful answer. It exceeded the rosiest dreams of Conrad and of Berthold and the rest of the war party at Vienna. The Austrian envoy brought back the joyous tidings which Conrad records in the following terms. Germany would stand on our side unconditionally, even if our advance against Serbia let loose the Great War. Germany advised us to set matters in motion. Perhaps never in the history of the world has so vast an obligation been entered into so incontinently. The Vienna cabinet was given a blank cheque, valid against the whole resources of the German Empire, to fill in at pleasure, provided only that it set to work without delay. By noon, the ministers forming the cabinet of the Austro-Hungarian Empire were assembled in conclave. The 8 men gathered around the table represented 4 nationalities and 5 governments. Berthold, as foreign minister, presided. Count Sturck, the Austrian prime minister. Belinsky, the joint finance minister. Krobotin, the war minister. Conrad, the warlord, and his naval colleague, Admiral von Kahler. Hoyos the last, but by no means least, Count Teaser. Very complete accounts of this meeting have been made public. Berthold began by saying that the Ministerial Council had been summoned to advise on the measures to be adopted for the restoration to a healthy basis of the bad internal political conditions in Bosnia and Herzegovina in connection with the Sarajevo catastrophe. It must be decided whether the moment had not come to render Serbia forever innocuous by a manifestation of power. A decisive stroke of this kind could not be effected without diplomatic preparations. Therefore, he had consulted the German government. The discussions in Berlin had led to a very satisfactory result, for both Kaiser Wilhelm and Herr von Bethmann-Hollweg had given assurances with all emphasis of the unconditional support of Germany in the event of a warlike complication with Serbia. He was clear that a passage of arms with Serbia might have war with Russia as a consequence. Russia was pursuing a policy which, on a long view, had for its object the consolidation of the Balkan states, including Romania, against the monarchy. In the face of such a policy, their situation must continue to grow worse. With one exception, the cabinet was spellbound with relief and thankfulness. Indeed, we cannot wonder at their mood. Imagine struggling for years against external menace and internal disruption. Imagine the rage and hatred for a deadly foe stifled for years. And then imagine an armed and invincible giant, a genius, superhuman in force and warlike skill, suddenly placed for the first time, perhaps for the last, at your absolute disposal. Rub the lamp, utter the incantation, and you have him at your service, nay, forever at your service, provided you do not fear to invoke him now or never. Teaser's resistance. Count Teaser alone stood forth in direct opposition. I shall never consent to a surprise attack on Serbia without previous diplomatic action, as seems to be intended, and to have been also regrettably discussed in Berlin by Count Hoyas. He shall in that case be in a very bad position in the eyes of Europe, and must also reckon on the hostility of the whole of the Balkans, except Bulgaria, without even the latter, now so much weakened, supporting us effectively. We must formulate demands on Serbia, and only send an ultimatum if Serbia does not accept them. These demands should indeed be hard, but not unfulfillable. If Serbia accepts them, we shall have a resounding diplomatic success to proclaim, and our prestige in the Balkans will rise again. If our demands are not accepted, then I too will be for warlike action. But I must here make plain that even in this event, our aim should be the diminishing, but not the annihilation, of Serbia. Russia would never consent to this without a life and death struggle, and as Hungarian Minister President, I will never consent to the monarchy annexing a part of Serbia. Then follows a significant sentence showing the positive pressure which the Kaiser and his Chancellor were applying to Austria. It is not Germany's affair to judge whether we ought or ought not now to launch action against Serbia. I personally am of opinion that it is not at the moment absolutely necessary to make a war. The agitation against us in Romania is very strong. In face of the excited public opinion there, we must reckon with a Romanian attack, and will in any case have to hold a considerable force in Zweibenberger to overawe the Romanians. Now when Germany has happily freed the way for Bulgaria's accession to the Triple Alliance, there opens to us a promising field for the successful diplomatic action in the Balkans, through the inclusion of Bulgaria and Italy in the Triple Alliance. France's strength compared to Germany's will grow even worse from her lower birth rate, and Germany consequently will in future years have more and more troops available against Russia. Thus Teaser, but he was isolated. The others resolved that unacceptable demands must be addressed to Serbia so that war would be inevitable, and this conclusion was conveyed to the Emperor. Teaser's Council. After the cabinet, Teaser sent a memorial to the Emperor. Such an attack upon Serbia would in human possibility provoke the World War, in which case I, despite all optimism in Berlin, should be obliged to regard Romania's neutrality as at least very questionable. Public opinion there would passionately demand war against us, a pressure which the present Romanian government could not resist at all, and King Carol only with great difficulty. In this war of aggression, the Russian and Romanian armies would have to be counted as in the enemy's camp, which would make our prospects very unfavourable. To summarise what I have said, a war provoked by us would probably have to be fought under very unfavourable conditions, whereas a postponement of the breach to a later date, if we make good diplomatic use of it, would result in an improvement in our relative strengths. If in addition to these political aspects, I take into consideration the financial and economic situation, which would make the conduct of the war immensely more difficult, and would render the sacrifices and suffering involved almost insupportable for the community, I cannot, after painfully conscientious reflection, share the responsibility for the proposed military aggression against Serbia. Strange indeed that this man should have perished at the hands of an assassin who believed he was avenging mankind upon one of the prime authors of its miseries. To make sure there was no mistake, Czerski, the German ambassador, smarting from a rebuke his earlier prudence had earned him, called Berthold next day. At the close of the visit, Berthold reported it to Teaser. He told me, wrote Berthold, that he had received a telegram from Berlin, according to which his imperial master instructed him to declare here with all emphasis that in Berlin an action against Serbia is expected, and that it would not be understood in Germany if we allowed the opportunity to pass without striking a blow. The blank cheque. Berthold and Conrad now proceeded to fill in the blank cheque. They made it out for all the assets of the German people and appointed a speedy date for payment. In the pigeonholes of the ballplatz, there lay a document prepared 3 years before for use against Serbia should occasion arise. This was the celebrated Ultimatum. It expressed all that Austria felt against its foe, and all that she had never until now dared to say out loud. Only a few minor changes in the wording were necessary to bring it up to date and make it fit the circumstances of the hour. In the course of the 8th of July, Conrad too visited Berthold. He found him with Baron Burian and Macchio, Counts Forgach and Hoyas. He writes, "I received information as to the demands which are to be handed to Serbia in an ultimatum with a short time limit of either 24 or 48 hours. It was to be expected that Serbia would refuse the demands, so that on the expiry of the time limit, mobilization for war would ensue." Berthold, what happens if Serbia lets things go as far as mobilization and then gives way all along the line? Conrad, then we march in. Berthold, yes, but if Serbia does nothing at all? Conrad, then Serbia remains occupied until the costs of the war have been paid. Berthold, we will not hand in the ultimatum until after the harvest and after the close of the Sarajevo inquiry. Conrad, rather today than tomorrow, so long as the situation is what it is. So soon as our opponents get wind of it, they will get ready. Berthold, care will be taken that the secret is kept most carefully and that no one knows anything of it. Conrad, when is the ultimatum to go out? Berthold, in 14 days, on the 22nd of July. It would be a good thing if you and the War Minister would go on leave for a time, in order to preserve the appearance that nothing is happening. We then spoke about the attitude of Romania and the possible intervention of Russia. Conrad, as to whether we are to go to war with Russia, we must be perfectly clear at once. If Russia orders a general mobilization, then the moment has come for us to declare ourselves against Russia. Berthold, if we enter Serbia and have occupied sufficient territory, what then? Conrad, with the occupation of territory, nothing has been attained. We must proceed until we have struck down the Serbian army. Berthold, and if it retires? Conrad, then we demand demobilization and disarmament. Once things have got that far, the rest follows. Berthold, only take no measures now which could give us away. Nothing must be done which would attract attention. Doom. Sentence of death had thus been signed, sealed and delivered upon the Empire of the Habsburgs, upon the Russia of Peter and of Catherine the Great, and upon the Germany of Bismarck. The end of the world of Queen Victoria was at hand. But now it is summertime, and all over Europe, families of every class are looking forward to their holidays. The Kaiser is cruising among the fjords of Norway. His generals and ministers are at watering places, salt or medicinal. Francis Joseph rests in his shooting lodge at Ilch. Conrad, as arranged, departs for Tyrol. Russian royalties and generals preen themselves at Homburg or Marienbad. The French president and his premier are banqueting and parading with the Tsar at St. Petersburg. London and Lancashire folk are thinking of Margate or the Isle of Man. Only the English cabinet is tethered to Westminster by the Irish troubles, and the Admiralty is busy with its test mobilisation, about which it had been fussing, and with the royal review of the entire British fleet appointed for the 3rd week in July. All is calm, and the skies are blue, and the weather genial. Nevertheless, a certain piece of foolscap, covered with typewriting, is lying in Berthold's portfolio. It will be dispatched to its address on the 23rd of July. The coming of war. Whole libraries have been written about the coming of the war. Every government involved has laboured to prove its guiltlessness. Every people casts the odium upon some other. Every statesman has been at pains to show how he toiled for peace, but was nevertheless a man of action, whom no fears could turn from the path of duty. Every soldier has found it necessary to explain how much he loved peace, but of course neglected no preparations for war. Whereas the causes of old wars are often obscure from lack of records, a vast fog of information envelops the fatal steps to Armageddon. 100 reasons are offered to show why all the governments and potentates acted as they did, and how good their motives were. But in this cloud of testimony, the few gleaming points of truth are often successfully obscured. In the mood of men, in the antagonisms between the powers, amid the clash of interests and deep promptings, of self-preservation, of self-assertion, in the hearts of races, there lay mighty causes. Then came a few short, sharp individual acts, and swiftly the final explosion. It is these acts that we must seek to discern. There was the man who fired the shots that killed the Archduke and his wife in Sarajevo. There was the man who, deliberately accepting the risk of a world war, told the Austrian Emperor that Germany would give him a free hand against Serbia and urged him to use it. There was the man who framed and launched the ultimatum to Serbia. These men took the fatal decisive steps. Behind them, hundreds of high functionaries laboured faithfully and energetically in that state of life upon which God had been displeased to call them, and each has his tale to tell. But no one except the doers of these particular deeds bears a direct, concrete responsibility for the loosing upon mankind of incomparably its most frightful misfortune since the collapse of the Roman Empire before the barbarians.